Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of Fractionally Speaking. Today, Sasha and I are talking to Ariel Weinberger, who is the CEO of Pezzo.ai, which is a deep tech startup focusing on creating developer tooling for teams who want to build better AI solutions. We talk about his journey from being a self-taught engineer through to now being the CEO of his own startup. He talks about investment and raising capital. They are part of Techstars Seattle as well, which is a great incubator to be a part of. He also goes on to talk about kind of advice that he would give aspiring first-time CTOs. Also, what advice he would give CEOs who wanted to hire their first CTO. And finally, we have a great conversation about AI. So I think it's well worth sticking around till the end for. All right, hope you enjoy and speak to you again soon. Bye.
Hi, Ariel. Really good to see you. We're really looking forward to the conversation today. You and I obviously have worked together quite a lot with Mike as well at not at DAZN. We sort of knew each other through DAZN, but we worked together at Abcam. How have you been? What have you been up to?
First of all, really glad to be here. I've been doing great recently, basically running my own startup in AI and deep tech. I guess, it's been a few years since then. I've had a few roles like engineering manager at some DevTool startups, VP engineering at another DevTool startup. Overall, been doing great, diving deep into AI and kind of embracing the paradigm shift that we're experiencing these days.
Amazing. So when we worked together, you were head of engineering, and that was at a established biotech, pretty traditional in many regards. And now you're the CEO of an early stage DevTool AI startup. Is being a CEO what you expected? Is it what you thought it would be? What's been unexpected about it?
I think my answer to this is not very traditional. I'll say why. So first of all, it's kind of what I expected in many elements and many aspects, but in many ways it's not. Being a CEO in general is, it's a whole different job. That's something that a lot of people don't really understand. They think, I have a great idea. It's a technical idea. So, I'm going to steer it and I'm going to be CEO. But what they don't realize is that a lot of it is like networking, investor relations, fundraising, which is a full-time job, basically. So that's the part where, I kind of expected that because I got to work very closely with other CEOs. I would say that, the things that I did not expect is I thought, it's just such an early stage startup. Surely I will have time at least for a while to keep doing the tech stuff that I'm so passionate about, whether it's hiring engineers or writing code or, contributing to designs and engineering efforts. But actually it's so busy, even in the early days. And that's when, and by the way, I don't have a CTO. So it's, I think that's a great topic to talk about as well. I'm a CEO and CTO in kind of one person, which I thought would be very manageable because again, it's deep tech. I haven't started my e-commerce startup or anything like that. It's things that are deeply, technological. And I thought, well, I should be able to do that, but that was kind of wrong.
Right, how have you found having to balance those two roles, and obviously it being it's your startup, it's your company, it's your idea. How have you found kind of delegating that responsibility of build if you can't be the hands-on person you thought you'd be?
That's also a tricky one because traditionally you delegate when you have people to delegate to. And I think especially these days, we've just been through the Techstars Seattle Accelerator. We have some limited runway that we need to be very smart about in terms of like raising our next round. So there were not always people to delegate to. The best you can do is use some freelancers in my situation, committing to a full-time engineering team or even full-time engineers sometimes is impractical. So in this particular stage, you kind of just have to do both and accept and understand that you're not going to be the best engineer for the time being, but definitely prioritize being the best CEO. Because once you unlock that capital, let's say, you can do so much more in terms of engineering. But if you focus too much on building cool features or the right feature or the best features, Fact is, you're going to be less of a great CEO. So it's just a compromise that you have to accept and push hard to get the money.
So you talked about what you were doing as a CEO, and there was a long list of non-technical things, which I think many techies, potentially including me, would run screaming from. What's been the hardest to pick up? What's been the real sort of shock to the system from those non-technical CEO skills?
All right. I would say fundraising. So, and again, I'm trying to be objective as much as I can, but I think, and at least based on the feedback that I've received and so far, I found that it's much easier for me to talk to people and build investor relationships and stuff like that than I thought it would be. I always thought that as engineers we have these, we're kind of sitting in our own little corner, very tunnel visioned, and then when it comes, times for us to socialize in a startup setup, we kind of struggle. But for me, it felt much more natural. Maybe it's because I've always had roles that are very, I used to speak at conferences. I have my online courses. I was always that social kind of developer, and people in my companies always loved it. So I found it to be easier. But there is this thought, especially if you see yourself as an inventor or a builder, which I certainly see myself as one, is like, I really have to convince people to give me capital. And oftentimes they're going to judge that based on my background, where I studied, and I don't have a degree, right? I'm self-taught. Sometimes it's like what accelerator I was in. I'm lucky to be at Techstars Seattle, which is considered a good, like a top tier accelerator. That certainly helped. But it's amazing how, maybe 2 years ago would have been much, much easier. You have a few thousand GitHub stars, you have a great project, initial traction. There was just, the interest rates were pretty much non-existent, so you could go and raise capital. And now I find myself there is that initial bias of why not to give capital because it's so scarce. And then I, an engineer, have to do the CEO stuff, sort of playing that quote unquote game, proving that I'm the right person to have that capital. Understandable, but that is something that as somebody who just wants to build, that's hard to get used to. I don't have to convince anyone to write code, but I do have to show that I'm the right person to have that capital. And that's hard to digest sometimes for developers and engineers.
Yeah. How did you find, it's interesting, when you're raising that capital, how much of it is the people investing in you as a founder versus the product you're building?
So I'm not an investor. So all I can say is like the things that I feel and the things that I hear from others who, wanted to invest, accelerator teams and stuff like that. There's usually 3 factors that investors invest in. Number 1 is team. Number 2 is market, or sometimes they like calling it, I think it's called founder market fit. And then the last thing is whatever you're building. Investors know really well that whatever you're building is just the beginning of a wave. Yeah. And if you are the right team, meaning you have the right background and you're in the right market, you are going to be able to steer to whatever direction, the market takes you. So I can pretty confidently say they invest in the team before anything else. And the factors that they're looking at is obviously background, like how are they likely to, have felt these problems in their own career? Because these are the best problems to solve. The second thing is, resilience. Historically, have they had to solve like really difficult problems in a very resourceful way? And the third thing is just, that I think people love when you think really wild. And what I've noticed is that as an engineer, we have the tendency to be, some of us, but I have the tendency to be modest about things. And I noticed that when I do that, I sort of suppress my ambitions. Like I actually want to change the world, but I'm thinking if I'm going to say that, they're going to think I'm a bit of a weirdo or but actually that's true. And I noticed that when I say that with passion, it really helps. So these are really the 3 things I think that investors are after.
So moving on from that, you've worked with a bunch of CEOs now, I guess, sort of in the tech space. Has your relationships, has your feelings about what it is to be a CEO changed over this time?
Yes, absolutely. I got to work with many CEOs, mostly in the deep tech and dev tool space. I can say that every CEO that I've worked with, and also every manager I've worked with, I was so lucky to learn something from, like actively learn something from. I've seen some that I would consider terrible, and I've seen some that are still like role models for me. Even though they did things that I dislike or think are wrong to do, they all did some things that I absolutely appreciated. So what I'm going to say is every CEO is different, but the most important thing that I think many CEOs are missing is nobody really lands or nobody is born in the CEO role. Nobody. Like you're either like a marketing expert who has an idea about some e-commerce platform or whatever, and you become that, or maybe you're an engineer and you become a CEO. Nobody gets training for becoming CEO. I think many of these training programs are, I'm sure some of them are good, but being a CEO is about driving your own vision. And the most important thing is to make sure everybody around you understands what your vision is and that they're on board. Because as a CEO, you're going to become so busy so fast, and you're not going to be there to make decisions. And if your people are not aligned with you, this level of alignment needs to make decisions for you as a team. And I've noticed many times that CEOs use their authority to tell people what to do. And I think in many cases it's justified. I mean, a lot of small companies, don't have a lot of money. They have a tight schedule, tight roadmap. So they have to use some authority to get things going. We don't expect, engineers or early employees to be perfectly aligned. But it's so important to work on that, because there are going to be times where the CEO is going to be just totally unavailable. And these values and roadmap and shared understanding of what really matters for that particular week, month, quarter will make the decisions. And I would love to see CEOs doing this more, and C-suite in general. I mean, it's so important.
I think a lot of what you're describing is a lot of the things that we try to instill in our teams, which is, what's the objective we're working towards? What's the value that we're trying to drive? What's the vision? Because we all know that if somebody if somebody in the team really understands what it is we're driving towards, they'll make the right decision. If they've got two decisions to make, they'll make the right one because they understand, the North Star we're aiming towards. Whereas when there's that ambiguity, people get stuck and they procrastinate and they're not sure, and you can't really move as quickly. So the point I'm trying to make is, the question I'm trying to ask, I suppose, is, do you feel as though your tenure as a technologist and as a head of engineering in the teams that you've managed has maybe set yourself up better for that type of CEO, as opposed to if you'd come from a more traditional, say, marketing or sales background?
I think my experience definitely helped, but not because I'm an engineer or not. I think it's because, at least, in my career, I've had situations that I was totally not prepared for, and I had to do things really fast and really well. I mean, take Abcam, for example. I joined Abcam originally as a principal engineer, as the first engineer in Amsterdam after Brexit. Fast forward a year later, of course, having Sasha and 101 Ways on board, we had, I think, 60 engineers, if I'm not mistaken. I was hired saying, yeah, maybe you'll hire 7 or 8. And I was totally down for that, setting up the team, taking it easy. But then, duty calls and you have to just do things really fast. And I was lucky enough to have, I think I have this ability to observe things going on. And if I see something going on, say at DAZN or other companies that I worked for, that I think was done well, but could have been done better, I can sort of keep it in memory and refer to it later on. And this is an example of something that wasn't good, or something was good but could have been better. Here's how I would do it in the future. So then when I got into this position at Abcam, being, essentially first engineer, growing the team to 50 or 60, I knew that the most important thing is that everybody is aligned. And I also knew that setting example is not something I can do on my own. So it has to do with spotting the right people and always putting emphasis on what good looks like, giving examples when somebody does a good thing without explaining necessarily, in detail what they did, because I like letting people seeing, okay, this person has been acting this way for a week or two, and this is what good looks like. And this leads to promotions, to more responsibility, to whatever. So that extreme focus on culture and alignment early on is something I've done before. and I've just seen it working like wonderfully, and that's why I'm doing it everywhere.
What advice would you give to somebody who's maybe taking that first CTO role, or they've got that idea and they want to be that kind of that CTO of their own tech startup? What advice would you give?
I think we can split this answer into two, because I think being CTO at a more established company like a scale up is very different from so let's start with becoming CTO at a established company. Appcam, for example, I was not CTO at Appcam. I was head of engineering, but I think my head of engineering role at Appcam the organization size there was essentially a small tech company, if you see it this way. So I think I could speak about that pretty well. If you join a company that is already established, already has capital, already maybe even has engineers that you get this sort of inheritance that you have to take care of, you have to make sure that you're good with not doing a lot of hands-on work. A lot of the work you're going to be doing is what I call, and others call too, it's politics. There is a lot of forces at play in large companies, and it's sad to say, but a lot of stakeholders many times would think about themselves and their personal success in their little box that eventually contributes to the success of the company. And as much as we try to avoid that, it always happens, and you have to just be ready for that. And my advice is to not be too turbulent about it, because I think I made this mistake where I joined an established company that is worth billions of dollars. And I joined with a passion of setting up engineering and engineering culture and technology and building the best product in the most efficient way that is very, tons of purpose, right? But I think if I was a bit more prepared for the nature of a more established company, I could have handled things better at an emotional level. So just a resilience thing. You have to prepare yourself, especially if you've not done this before. Because some of you will be hired as CTOs because of your technical skills and your background in startups. But then you have to prepare and maybe even get coaching, honestly, that really helps. And how to steer that maybe more, I don't want to say corporate because it's not all corporate, but just more mature tech world. So that's the advice on the more established companies part. For startups, you have to know that you're going to work a lot, especially if you're early stage. When you're a CTO for a startup, you're inevitably the face of that startup as well. It's not just the CEO. When investors invest in you, they invest in both a CEO and a CTO. Actually, CTO role is extremely important for early stage startups, and I've seen it firsthand. Many investors will not invest as a rule in startups that do tech and don't have a CTO. So if you can be that CTO, that is not just a developer, but also, you can also articulate yourself very well, and you can, talk about what you're doing in a way that simplifies things for others. You have to get used to doing that because you are going to be a part of that fundraising loop inevitably in the later stages. You're going to have to find solutions many times on your own because you're not going to have people on board, especially again for an early stage startup. You're going to have to find the balance between getting things done. So you're going to have to push people to get things done in a certain way, but don't be too much of a micromanager, because then those people are going to leave. And there's nothing worse for an early stage startup than having somebody aboard for 6 months and then leaving. And by the way, the startup is 7 months old. So that's bad. Vastly different, roles. I would say early stage startup, just prepare to do anything and everything. That's just the nature of the role.
Yeah. So if we flip the thought, or where our heads are at from a CTO perspective, if you're a CEO at a startup and you're wanting to get into funding and you don't have a CTO yet, and obviously there's pressure, like you mentioned, if you want to get funding, you need to have a CTO. If you are that CEO needing to hire that first CTO, what advice would you give to the CEO? What should they be looking for, and how should they approach it?
Cool. I guess we're talking about startups that don't have capital yet, right?
Yes. Let's start there.
Cool. So to the CEO, I would really, this is my advice. So you're going to be in this journey for 5, 7, and even 10 years. Whoever you're going to bring on board, ideally, will stick, for the entire journey. You need to make sure that you have first of all, that you could be good friends. It's not just about business at this point. Like, you're going to be in the trenches for so long, and you're going to experience the best times of your life as well as the worst times of your life. And you need to be able to support each other. This is beyond your typical, I'm going to hire my I don't know, engineering manager or whatever. You're actually going to hire a friend in a way. Of course, the tough thing is that you have limited time and you don't know if that person is going to be able to, become that. But whatever you do when you hire that person, think this is going to be a long, long journey. Now, the second thing is, I need to think for a moment. One sec. Because this is honestly like the most important advice. You have to get along. Most startups fail because of founder conflict early on. So, and the second thing is, and this is especially important for tech startups. Many CEOs start tech startups thinking about a solution they want to build. The implementation of that solution is something that as a CEO, you're just not going to be able to own. I mean, it's not going to be possible. So whoever you hire, make sure you're totally okay with them taking ownership of tech. Now, naturally in deep tech, AI, dev tools, whatever startups, CEO definitely has some say in terms of technology. In many cases, the implementation details are also the product, if you think about developer tools. So it's always a fine line in these kind of cases. But whatever you do, when you bring a CTO on board, they are going to own technology. That's why they're CTO. And that is also something you have to accept, because good CTOs will not tolerate being micromanaged by their CEOs, and it does not matter how much equity they get. And your goal is to get the superstar, right? So you have to adopt that mentality. So these are kind of my two main pieces of advice. Maybe a third one that is more technical: be generous with equity. Again, it's a 5, 7, 10 months, 10 years journey. And whatever you think, vision you've developed or built in 2, 3, 4 months is nothing compared to the 5, 7, 10 years journey. And again, everybody needs to feel, that things are fair. And I'm going to follow the Y Combinator advice, generic advice. All founders should be equal, at least at an early stage, because it just makes sense. You don't want your CTO to feel that they're doing a lot and not getting enough 2 years into the journey. That's much harder to fix. So yeah, that would be it, I guess.
That's some excellent advice. I think I remember reading a book on starting a business, and it gave the example of somebody who was amazing at making cakes, and they wanted to start a cake shop, and it was very difficult. And the advice was, well, you don't make cakes anymore. You're a business person. And I think that when you work at that C-suite level, whether it's 2 people or 2,000 people or 200,000 people, that still applies. So anyone at that level is about the business first. We will have our specialities, but I think that is some fantastic advice. So, in amongst all of this, can you see an opportunity to accelerate a startup through using people who perhaps work fractionally, who have Mike and I have talked about this on previous episodes, but who don't have equity, but do have a great deal of experience, who don't have the political needs that inevitably come with working in an organization, but they're only working fractionally, whatever that means. That could be 4 days a week, it could be even 5 days a week, or it could be half a day a week, or anything like that. Do you see that there is space in there at any stage in startups?
All right, I have mixed opinions about this, and I'll tell you why. So first of all, I think it really depends on what you're doing. If you're building in dev tools or deep tech or AI, and you don't have a full-time CTO that is invested in the business and has equity, I just don't think that's setting up, the company up for success. But that is a very specific use case. I think for other areas like, health tech, HR tech, e-commerce, and even more technical, areas, it doesn't have to be that, the traditional spaces. In many cases, the company, there is access to capital. There's a need to hire teams, bootstrap. I've seen engineering managers, senior engineering managers who operate as well as CTOs, genuinely, like if you hire the right people. But to hire the right people, I've rarely seen really, really solid engineering leaders, joining because the CEO is great. A lot of, if you want to hire the best tech people to work on your startup, and sometimes you could hire 3 amazing ones and save a lot of money versus hiring 8, mediocre ones. Having that CTO, even fractional CTO, to get the talent and help hire the right people, that in itself is huge value, because CEOs, again, who have access to capital, have invested, and have a great idea, they wouldn't know how to get started. And sometimes I guess you folks get to deal with this all the time. A lot of times these startups have something that was built by contractors, and contractors communicating, technical folks communicating with CEO, that is extremely difficult. And then what happens is they realize, okay, I need a CTO, but I don't want to bring in a co-founder, so I'm going to bring a fractional CTO. So I think 100% there's many use cases where having a fractional CTO just on a 4 days a week, 3 days a week basis works. Bootstrapping, hiring folks, making tech decisions, talking to the board, by the way. I mean, having a technical person talking to the board to balance things out a little bit and bring that technical perspective. I think it works. I think it depends on the stage of the company and depends on the fractional CTO. Because as I'm saying this, there are some people that if I imagine I could pay them, on an hourly or a weekly basis and have them on board, it would change everything I think about. Like, yes, I want that. So it really depends on who the person is. Yeah, it's not a definitive answer, unfortunately.
No, but it is a great answer, and I think I agree with it. I think that you can't be a deep tech company and not have, because actually I think that the CTO role is quite different in a deep tech company, because in the same way that I think probably if you're a meditech company, you need someone who understands healthcare, for example, and that person is probably going to be the CEO, maybe a COO or something like that, and so side by side, when we compare it to your company right now, Pezzo, doing AI work, the idea of not having that person makes a huge difference. You can't do it.
I mean, that's the truth.
Yeah, you can't do it.
Yeah.
But you can.
But I want to say, now that you're saying that, one of the, I think, more valuable use cases is, even if you're a deep tech company and you have some folks that, maybe 1 or 2 engineers who could potentially grow to lead the engineering team, CTO is something. So, okay, if you go through an early stage, pre-seed stage, and you manage to raise capital on your own as a CEO, you don't find often that they will bring in a CTO after the fact. That's just too much equity to give for a company that raised $2, $3, $4 million. So oftentimes they will look into having a VP engineering, head of engineering, whatever. And many times these are folks from within the team. I think bringing in a fractional CTO that you know and trust, who could help mentor and grow that person into the role and establish the engineering practices alongside them, this is a fantastic use case for bringing a fractional CTO on board.
Yeah, I definitely echo that. I have a bias because it's something that I've done. And I think that one of the nice things about having a fractional CTO in that sort of capacities is that they're also often prepared to do some of the work that actually nobody wants to do, and that can be very, very useful. I think certainly in the UK there are types of investors who still respond well to effectively age. Like having an older person in some of those meetings seems to work. They roll me out with my grey hair and white.
Time to grow my beard, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So I definitely agree with all that, and thanks for the honesty and candor. That's exactly what we're looking for. Is there anything that you want to add, or you want to ask us, or anything that's sort of struck you during this that you'd like to add?
Well, I'm curious to hear from your perspective. I mean, I guess you've seen yourself among boards and stuff like that. something we always hear and see in the look. I've done my accelerator in the US. It was a 4-month, 3.5 months long program, let's say. The voices that I hear is everybody has to do AI. Either to, by the way, we can talk about my opinion on AI and using AI and stuff like that separately. But do you hear that? Like, do you see that? Based on like your work as fractional CTOs and fractional C-suite in general, how is that going? Like, does everybody really want AI, or is that more?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think what's happening is that people who don't really understand what AI is say we need to have it because it's flavor of the month. It will grow our, it will grow everything. Everyone has it, and people who do understand it to some degree go along with it because they also think, well, you know what, it isn't super hard to do. And that might be that's probably because they're senior and haven't done it, but they look at it and they go, well, it's a bunch of APIs. I'll just hook into a bunch of APIs and we'll have a chat bot and it'll be fine. So I can say yes, get brownie points and move on to actually growing the business, because they might not think that it will. So it absolutely is. Mike, do you have a...
Yeah, all I was going to say was, yes, it is. And I think it's that conceptual use of AI. I think when you actually try to find, really like things that will enhance customer value, well, the customer experience if you're B2C or even customer if it's B2B, things that actually will genuinely have positive impacts are hard to find in a lot of different scenarios. So there is pressure from the board and from investors definitely to implement AI and integrate AI. But actually finding those use cases, I think, is actually quite difficult. And then also, it's brand new tech, and people make mistakes, and they don't realize that LLMs learn over time, that the outputs will change, that, it's only as good as the data you train it on. There's all those things. If you give something bad data, you're going to get bad things back. You've got biases, you've got, is it diverse enough in its thinking? I mean, there's so many factors that if you launch it and get it wrong, it can actually do a lot of detrimental impact to your brand as well. And I think these are things that I think companies are wrestling with right now. And it's going to be an interesting few years, I think, because it's still the days. And the amount of times I see job ads for people who have been leading AI teams for the last 5 to 10 years, it's like those people don't exist. So it's they probably do, but very, very small number of people. So it's Do
you want to hear my 2 cents on this one?
Yes, please do.
Cool. So 2 things. It might be very controversial, by the way, but if I would say I decided that I want to. Okay, 2 things. First, should I do AI or not? I think what we've seen with generative AI exploding is a bunch of products that take AI capabilities like summarization, sentiment analysis, generating content and just wrapping it with some logo under a domain and serving. That's, in my opinion, that's kind of pointless because, ChatGPT and engines like that, when all your product is just AI, that's hype, and that hype ended within 3 months, and nobody would, invest in this kind of stuff anymore. I think the best businesses to leverage AI are businesses that already have like product market fit. And, you can think of Jira, for example. Imagine Jira would just implement an AI feature that whenever you create a task, knows based on your Confluence documentation or a meeting you just had to pre-fill that task and pre-assign it to the person that you folks discussed in your retro should work on that. So that is really impactful AI that enhances productivity. And I think there is a lot of products that we can think of with product market fit that could use AI to enhance their existing offering. But when all of your offering is AI, I'm not saying it's not valid, but I'm saying it's going to be much, much harder to convince why you're the right person. So like on that, if you have an existing problem you're solving and customers that are, say, spending 1 hour every week or every day on your product to do X, if they can spend less to do more, that's great value. And that's a great reason to use AI. No, and the second thing you talk about, like hiring folks with 5 years AI expertise, and that's where I think it's a bit controversial. If I were like a company that looks, wants to implement AI, the last folks I would hire are 5 years, folks that have experience in AI for 5 years. The traditional AI space is very much driven, by data scientists. These are folks who most of the time don't take apps to production. They usually do, they deal with so much data. They're extremely, by the way, brilliant people. They've set up the models, they train them. But there's not that end-to-end thing that we see most commonly with full stack developers, with I would say modern engineering teams, cross-functional, take a problem and bring it to production. And that's what generative AI these days allows us to do. It's just one API call. So I think some of the best profiles for AI experts to hire to lead these efforts today are folks who have that full stack cross-functional leadership experience and have kind of dipped their toes in AI enough. I've seen that, in Techstars and others, these just tend to deliver so much faster. And they cover the whole cycle.
Yeah, I've seen exactly this.
Sasha and I were literally talking about this yesterday morning. Writing some, building systems and platforms that are robust and scalable, and that are well tested, that aren't going to fail is a very that's the skill of software engineering. If you're a data scientist who predominantly writes in Python, you can't just take that Python code and then put it up into production and expect that it's going to work. It needs that software engineering space. So actually, collaboration between those two is really, really important. So personally, I don't think you could have one without the other necessarily, but it's how do you get both sides working well together.
And I think it's about understanding the difference between what a data scientist does and somebody who brings AI to a product, because they are very different. And often you almost always need one, but you don't always need the data scientist. Again, that is that is because they're overqualified. Let's be frank. They are super overqualified.
Unless their product is AI at its core and models and stuff like that.
Absolutely. I have a question which I think might be a little bit controversial, and it's based on a theory that I have, and I want to see what you think about it. So it feels to me a little bit like AI, the boom in AI and the funding in AI happened at a very convenient time for tech, because the market in crypto and that whole the whole crypto world was receding, and I think that a lot of investors who had invested in organizations that couldn't really benefit from crypto felt left out. Right? They were like, crypto is the latest greatest thing. How do I make money from it? All of my investments are in things that where crypto isn't appropriate. And then AI comes along and says, we're appropriate for everything. You should totally invest in us. And I think that to some degree we've encouraged that, because it's been a bit of a lifeline into the tech, into funding tech companies. I do think that I'm hoping that we are going to move back to a slightly more sensible, balanced model of funding, so that there is money for organisations that don't have AI in their name. What is that something that because you will have seen both, right? You understand how cryptography and cryptocurrency works. And where it's appropriate and where it's not. Is that something that resonates with you?
Yes. So I'm going to give the perspective of somebody who would say, talk to investors, trying to raise capital. Here's what I think. I think there's a lot of similarity between, the crypto space and the AI space, mostly in terms of hype. It suddenly, exploded and everybody was into it. And then in the crypto case, it kind of crashed. And I think the reason is, I think blockchain is an absolutely incredible technology. It can change the world, honestly. It's super impactful. But to us consumers, say you build an app that allows me to buy art, or an app that allows me to transfer money. It could work with blockchain in the background, but I wouldn't know. Now, with crypto came all these, trading, the scams, FTX, all those things that legitimately just hurt crypto as a name. And people, I think, the average consumer sees crypto as an investment thing that might work versus the blockchain technology. And I think that is the downside of crypto. AI, however, is used in production. It does wonders. Of course, it has risks like everything. And that's, there's going to be solutions to that. But there, AI benefits from not having that bad reputation that crypto has, whereas, you could go and buy a Bitcoin and lose it because some, stock exchange or crypto exchange, whatever, went bankrupt. So I think this is where people are a little bit careful. What I'm going to say is every single product that I've worked on historically, whether as an engineer or as an engineering leader, could really benefit from AI. And I sometimes talk to these folks and give them ideas. You have to find the way to do it. You have to think if now is the right time and if it's worth your effort. And, what are you going to, bring to your users after you implement it, and is it worth it? But I think AI is going to be everywhere. And I think I've done a lot of research on this when doing some fundraising for Pezzo. I think in the near future, about 2 out of every 10 user interactions are going to involve AI in any shape or form, whether it's recommendation, analysis, generating some content, whatever. And I think that's in the near term. I think in the long term, it's going to be much, much more. And I'm not even talking about the background aspect of like optimization that AI can do. I'm talking about the user facing things. But yeah, overall, I agree. It was a bit of a long way to say that. I just think it's important to know that the crypto space is heavily influenced by bad stuff going on with crypto exchanges, whereas AI has already, I think, crossed that boundary where we clearly see the value in real life and in production. And I think that's where the difference lies. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was very careful not to use the word blockchain because blockchain is obviously something very powerful and very different. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you. I sense that we could talk for hours. And perhaps at some point...
So that was our chat with Ariel. We hope you found that interesting and insightful. We had a great time chatting with him. And we will get him back to definitely talk more about AI. I think that discussion at the end was really interesting. And I think there's going to be a lot more we can talk to him about there. So stay tuned for future conversations with other technology leaders and company leaders. And if you have any questions or anything you'd like us to cover in the future, please feel free to add a comment below. Don't forget to click subscribe and like. And we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.